Yeah, so this is our last actual section in module one. So this is going to be about, was it HTML, CSS, web scraping, all that good stuff. We'll kind of talk about a little bit of like why we web scrape and stuff like that, and say, to be honest, web scraping is kind of like, if you're trying to get something done, web scraping is kind of like your last resort. And I shouldn't say it's your last resort, but it's one of the last resorts. You want to usually get something that's already kind of cleaned up and all that. And web scraping basically is like the opposite of that. It's saying, hey, let me go see if I can find the data myself. I would say like below like web scraping, like an amount of effort and like amount of like things you want to try to avoid, it's probably like literally going out and doing a survey, like sending a survey out and seeing what people say. And even that sometimes might be a little cleaner. But anyway, we'll kind of talk a little bit about HTML, CSS today before we get into web scraping, where once we know HTML, CSS, it becomes a lot easier to process a website and stuff. And we'll see if some time today, we're going to kind of play around with a website and see if we can start scraping some data from it. Okay, sound pretty good? Cool. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk about HTML. Cool. All right, let me move you guys so I can see everyone's face. Awesome. So real quick, just give me a thumbs up, whether it's from the curriculum or from your own experience. What's your comfortability for HTML? Thumbs up if you're like, yeah, I got this. I used to be a web developer. Thumbs down if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't reached this point yet. Okay, see some sideways, see some thumbs up, see some partly in between. That's good. We have a good spectrum going on here. All right. So one thing, HTML and CSS, if you're just going to take anything from HTML, basically it's just a way to write web pages. The web basically is built around HTML. It basically is, well, first of all, it might help if I kind of break down like what HTML stands for. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And you might realize, like I very briefly talked about it because it's technically in the appendix. There is another markup language that we talked about, which is extensible markup language, or XML. So you can actually think of HTML being a very specialized version of XML, which, obviously we haven't really talked too much about, but you'll see once you understand XML, HTML, it's more or less kind of like you get the idea of what's going on. One thing to note is that HTML, which is like these files and stuff like this, are actually just like files, like literally files, and it just tells the browser like, here's this information with what we call markup, right? Basically it's saying like what these things are, and the browser, what you're looking at, basically decides how to make these, how to render this, basically how to makes it, what's it called? Like makes it pretty basically versus like a text file, okay? So you can actually see right here, we actually are using it's using HTML, basically deciding, should it be like a title? Should it be larger? Should it be blue? Should it be green? All these different things. You can do some pretty cool stuff if you are a web developer, which we are not. So we're just basically tearing things apart. Someone built this beautiful clock and we're going to tear it apart so we can figure out what's inside it. Okay. So some quick syntax and stuff like this is very similar to XML, like I said. We have tags. So tags basically are these little brackets right here. And basically these tags are saying, hey, here's some content. So you can see here, for example, this is a paragraph, is your content. And then your tag is basically surrounding around your content saying, hey, this content is this tag, or like this tag is this context of the content, if that makes sense. So for example, this is the content, this is a paragraph, and this tag P right here, it says in your HTML, your markup saying, hey, this is a paragraph. So basically the idea there, it's giving context to this extra information. Okay, and so like, all the stuff is here, but this paragraph right here helps us give us like, say, okay, what should the browser do? Like, should it render in a special kind of way? Okay, does that make sense to people? Okay, and that's why we call it markup, because we're basically marking up the file and saying what it looks like. Another part of HTML are the attributes. So we can have different tags. For example, I showed the P here. For HTML, A, it represents a link. The real reason why these are like why is it P and A? It's because they're short. Basically, someone decided way long ago when HTML script coming apart, and they basically said, well, let's use some short stuff. That way we don't have to type a whole lot. So you'll see like more modern HTML tags are a little bit longer and stuff like that. And that's partly because it's just like, oh, they're like, whatever, we don't care if we type an extra few parts because usually that's autofilled anyway. But attributes basically live within the tags. And these attributes are basically saying something special about these tags and are giving extra information. So for example, a link in HTML is just a simple A right here. And you can see here, we still have that brackets like this. Okay, so we have a tag, we have an A tag, which is going to be a link. And then we have this guy right here, href equals google.com. I don't know if you guys can hear that plane go by. But anyway, you can see this link right here, or sorry, this attribute href equals, and then this guy. And this is basically giving extra context on top of this like tag itself. And you can see here, here's my content, click here for Google with the exclamation part. And then you can see, I might have skipped over this part because I'm going really quickly, but this is an end tag. So every HTML tag with an asterisk has a end tag. So we begin with something. So for example, this is a paragraph, and we say, okay, this is a paragraph until we hit here, which is our end tag. So you always see it with a caret, with a backslash, or I guess forward slash, and then that tag itself. So you can actually nest tags within it. So this is kind of important. So that way, whoever's reading the HTML, when I say whoever, I mean like a computer, knows that, oh, this is like a link within a paragraph. So they know where that part ends. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like it's almost like a parentheses, right? Or parenthesis. And it's kind of like that specific parenthesis for this kind of tag. Okay. So what's kind of cool is you can actually write HTML in Jupyter Notebook. So if I actually click on this, so you guys see this all Markdown before. If I actually double click on this right here, you can actually see that this is valid HTML. But when you can see it rendered underneath here, is that when I render this, it actually I don't see this A, I don't see this href and all this stuff. I just see click here for Google. And what this is basically saying is like, hey, this is the link. So take this content and mark it up so it acts like a link. And the link should be this href right here. The link is this guy. So if I go ahead and let's just go and click on this, you can actually see on the bottom of my screen it says google.com. It's actually not going to properly work because if I go here, it's actually going to try to go to a file called google.com. If I wanted to make it actually work to go to the real google.com, this is where that HTTPS comes in, or HTTP. Note that S and the P, without the S and the P effectively works the same. The S basically adds an extra encryption security layer, but most websites now have HTTPS. Anyway, if I do this guy now, this should work unless Google doesn't let www. And you can see, you go to Google. Okay. Does this make sense so far? Come together. Kind of fun, kind of a quick like pop quiz and like see who knows this. What happens if I give it like a different tag? Let's say I call like Victor's special tag equals, I don't know. Hi, I'm super creative today. Well, you can already see that it works, but does anyone got an idea like, will this do anything different? All that stuff. Idea of what it could do. I'll tell you right now, it definitely doesn't break it, right? Because you can see that it's still down here, right? So this is what
reference it later.
Yeah, I could reference it later, right? I could be like, hey, like look for this attribute Victor special tag, right? And this will work. Like you can see here, this is actually working perfectly fine. So some people actually talk about HTML as like actually really useful in this way, because if let's say you use a new thing, but the browser doesn't support it, it more or less shouldn't break it. It basically, HTML is like, oh, I'll just ignore that. You know, it doesn't know what it is. It just skips over it. If it does know specifically what that tag is, it'll add this in. And this is actually really important when we talk about HTML5 and stuff like this, where older browsers or browsers that are not up to date and stuff like this might not support some of these tags. Or if you never update your browser, it might, you know, not support some of these later tags. But for the most part, it won't completely break HTML. Unfortunately, this also means that people do misspellings and stuff, like web developers or people as well. And so you might see some things that aren't be exactly right. So kind of be aware of this when you start web scraping and stuff. But for at least the user, they won't be able to see this difference. Okay. Sound pretty good? Cool. All right. And note that also, like you can see I have two attributes. You can actually have multiple attributes in the same tag. So I can have like as many as I want. I'm going to say as many as you want. I don't think there's technically a strict like number that you can't have. And I'm sure if someone's like a real expert in HTML, they probably would say, well, you know, by the standards of W3, whatever. You see, I don't even know what the standards is, but basically, I'm sure someone knows. All right, last part is comments. So we know what comments are in Python. HTML also has comments. You can see here is a comment basically starts with this bracket, right? So like almost all HTML has this kind of bracket, but then you can see it's exclamation mark and then dash dash, and then ends with dash dash bracket. I should say bracket. I should say caret. I don't know, arrow. I don't know what to call that. But anyway, that's how a comment is. And you can also do multi-line. So you can see here, this will comment out this part. So you can see is that I can have kind of multiple on there. And you can see if I just go ahead, remember this is, this renders as HTML. If I did like this, oops, sorry, I used the wrong key. Switch my windows, there we go. Oh, I forgot I have that special thing. There we go. And you can see it's disappeared because it's basically considering this as valid HTML and says, oh, don't even bother showing this. So just kind of know that's how comments are found. In general, you won't be scraping comments because usually they're not really that relevant, because the reason why you're probably scraping the website is just the stuff you can see. So there's not usually a reason why you'd see comments, but just kind of know that those are there. Okay. Any questions so far? Sound pretty good? Thumbs up on? Okay, cool. All right, I'm just gonna leave that alone. Whatever, you can see it's messed up, but that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to talk about HTML DOM, right? So the DOM, or document structure. And so this is where I'll say kind of this weird part is that like I have never seen, I don't even, like I'm not a web developer, right? But I've dealt with enough HTML, kind of some web development. I have never actually seen anyone use anything past this point, but technically HTML has this very beginning part of like the structure of how HTML goes. And the very first thing you're supposed to do is this doc type HTML like this. And this basically is supposed to signal, say, hey, this is allowing HTML5. Technically, this is like future proof where like in the future, they might add other doc type something else that's not HTML. I don't even know if that exists. And this has been around for like, I don't know how many years. So just know technically like maybe in like 10 years, you might see something else that's different. I don't know. But know that technically for HTML, it should start on this. But again, because web developers are people, and also web developers, sorry, any web developers who ever seen this, might not always be the best programmers. They'll sometimes do these things and ignore it and stuff like that. So know that sometimes your document's not going to be quite right. But we don't really care because we're not going to write documents. We're going to just scrape them. So the overall structure is basically kind of like, you can think of it like a person. You have HTML. So you can see this start of saying, hey, this is the HTML document. So we always have this HTML start, and it's going to end right here. Note that I indented. Technically, you don't have to indent. Spaces don't matter at all in HTML, at least for the tags and everything like that. But basically, this is saying, hey, everything that is from here to here will be HTML. Okay? And then from there, we have something called the head, right? And so this head starts from here, goes to here, and that basically is usually giving some extra information about the HTML document. So these are the things that like aren't being shown to like the user, like where you actually load the page and everything like that. These are things like usually like JavaScripts or, you know, different like web scripts are kind of loaded in here. Sometimes somebody will talk about CSS, basically how things should look are kind of loaded in here and stuff like this, as well as things like, you know, that's pretty much it. Like basically it's going to be CSS or maybe scripts and stuff like that. And maybe some extra metadata and stuff like that can be found in here as well. So for the most part, we kind of ignore this part when we're scraping because we don't really care about this stuff. This is basically how things are supposed to look and act, okay? And then the next part is this body. So pretty much every HTML document has HTML, head, and body. There might be some extra stuff too. For example, footer is a very common one, but in general, you'll at least see body. And this body basically is usually the stuff that like actual, like things that you care about. So this is the content of your page. So think of like, you know, like your pictures are in here, your, you know, things you can type into, like all these different stuff. That's where all this content really comes from. Okay. So this is kind of the overall HTML structure, or I should say HTML DOM. All right. Sound pretty good? Thumbs up, sound pretty good? Any questions at all? No? Okay. Yeah, and stop me if you're like, wait a second, or like, oh, can you clarify something?
Victor, I have a question. What is as a whole? What is that specifying?
Which one?
The language as a whole. It says the HTML document as a whole. Is it like specifying anything like more?
Oh, this guy?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm just giving an example. Like you would have other things in here. Like you would have, for example, like just to kind of give an example real quick, is style. And so you'd have you'd have things about the HTML or the CSS, like how it looks basically. And so you'd have information right here. So this basically just might have metadata about the document saying, you know, like, oh, this was created here. This is, you shouldn't like scrape this, you know, like, oh, this is when it was created, you know, all these different things. And then you might also have some extra information about saying, hey, this is how the HTML document should look. And so the browser will read some of this information like style or from CSS pages or files and stuff like this to say, hey, this is how it should look. That's kind of what's going on here.
Gotcha.
Makes
Thanks.
sense? Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Okay. I was too lazy. I didn't want to type stuff. That's why I just put this comment in here. I'll show you guys examples in a bit. All right. So now we can talk about like, okay, what usually goes in this like body and stuff like this. So these are some common HTML elements, basically paragraphs, headers, images, lists, and tables. That's kind of more or less like, there's some other things in HTML5, but these are basically most of what you'll see. So that's kind of like what you'll kind of go across. We'll talk about some extra parts and we'll kind of see that when we're web scraping. But first thing is paragraphs, which we saw. Basically, that's the thing that defines like, oh, this is written stuff. So like think of like when you're writing an article or a blog post or just really any information that's not like a title, that's going to be most likely written in a paragraph form. Okay. Then we also have headers. So you can see here, this is H1 and there's also H2. And basically H1, H2, H3 are showing like different levels of importance. So I think it goes up to H6. I think technically, yeah. Again, I'm not a web developer. I'm pretty sure H6 is the lowest it goes. But you can think of it like, you know, the main title, a subtitle, and then maybe a subtitle after that. You can actually see this work in Markdown. So one kind of quick thing is that Markdown really is like a simplified form of HTML. Basically, Markdown converts over to HTML. But you can see here, like, for example, I have these two like hashtags, right? This is like, you know, a subheader, like a subheader or a subtitle. You can kind of see, it's like, well, here's my main title, here's my second title, here's my subtitle after that. That's the equivalent of me doing H1, H2, H3. Okay, does that make sense to people? Okay, cool. So that's kind of the overall structure. So this is really useful like when you're trying to scrape through and trying to figure out like the document of like where things are. So H1, H2, H3 can kind of give you an idea of like the structure of what's going on. And of course, just know that technically sometimes web developers will just use H2 when there is no H1 because they just like to use H2 for some reason or whatever. I don't know. I'm not in their mind. So just to kind of know these are all like technically what you should do, but people break these rules. Okay. Next one we have image, which is usually a big one for web scraping because we want to pull up a bunch of images and stuff like this. So with an image, we have this img tag. And then note that image is a little bit different. So you can see here, there's actually no ending tag here. It's just img all the way through. Some people will end it with a backslash bracket, but people will also just keep it this way. I think technically this is the formal way to do it. But anyway, the main thing is that the image is just one big tag. And you can see here the source is going to basically be it pointing to where the image relies. And that could either be on the web, so it could be like a web URL, or it could be an actual file path in the, what's it called? Like in the web server and stuff like this. You can also see alt here. Alt basically is kind of like an extra, usually it's like a hover text, but technically it's like for use for accessibility. There's some other things you can put in here that were recently done. Like, I'm just gonna quickly show you guys. Let's see. Does anyone know XKCD? It's a web comic. So you can see here, like, it's like, oh, there's a little comic here, here's an image. And then if I hover over, you'll see it pop up. There's a little pop-up image. So know that, or little pop-up text. So if I'm actually gonna go ahead and inspect, we'll show this in a second. But you can see here, here's the image tag right here, the source. You can see there's also a title, which is the thing that pops over when I hover. And then if they're good, oh, they're not good. What they also might add is, sorry, kind of trying to go, what they might also add is an alt text. And an alt text basically is like, for example, if for the people who are maybe sight impaired or, you know, maybe it's pulling it out. So it's like, it reads it to you kind of deal. The alt text will be read instead of showing an image. So alt text can also be important information, but you can see there's a bunch of other little tags in here. In this case, it looks like source set. I actually don't even know what that is. Learn something over here. Okay, so we'll look more into that stuff. But anyway, that's images. So, and really, when you're looking for an image, you're looking for where the image is, and most likely you're looking for the source. Okay. And then we have lists. So lists can be really important for us as data scientists because usually we're looking for data and stuff like this, and it might be in a list form. So note that there's two types of lists. There's unordered lists and ordered lists. So an unordered list is basically these bullet points. So you can see how there's like kind of bullet points and there's kind of bullet points within bullet points. That's an unordered list. An ordered list is basically just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you might have seen me do this before in Markdown. And note that basically this UL versus OL, basically they're saying, hey, from here to here, this is going to be a bunch of lists. Like things are going to be part of my list. Same thing for ordered list. And then the LI stands for, has anyone got to guess what LI stands for? List. I think I saw someone's, I think I saw Steve. Item, yeah. List, I think you said list item, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
list item.
Exactly. So it's just an item in a list, right? So this basically will be create this list item. So if actually, let's see if I can kind of quickly just show you guys, since you can see here, makes an unordered list, coffee, vinyl records, pickling. Oh, I got confused. Ordered is the next part. So you can see that's an unordered list. Okay. You can see with ordered lists, if I get rid of this guy, I'm just doing this so Jupyter Notebook knows to say, hey, go ahead and render this as items. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, okay. What's kind of cool too is that it will automatically count. You don't have to put in the numbers in there. So, yeah. Okay. Makes sense for lists and stuff like that. All right, cool. Last one is tables. So tables, like you're like, if you find a data table, you're like, oh my gosh, amazing. Like this is a data scientist's dream because basically they're ordering this information. However, note that they can add some extra stuff to it. So you always have to be really careful about like how you read these tables. But in general, basically they're data frames, right? Data frames and like Excel sheets, tables, kind of the same thing. You might have some weirdness in tables and stuff like that. For example, something called column span, where basically this header might overtake one of the columns and stuff like this. So just kind of be aware when you're scraping. But the idea here is you say, okay, from here to here, all of this is table stuff. And then you can see this TR, TH, and TD. This TR basically stands for table row. So you can say like, oh, here's the first table row, first table row, first table row. So you can see it's going to split up this way. And then TH stands for header, table header. So you can say, like, okay, here's the first header, second header, third header, right? You can see 0, 1, 2. And then TD is supposed to stand for table data, if I remember this right. So basically each of this like in this row, so this right here corresponds to this row, and then this TD stands for this table data right here. Okay, does that make sense to people? So this is a nice, neat table, but note that sometimes people are not nice and neat and want to, I don't know if they want to do it, but I think they try to mess with data scientists. It feels like that sometimes. You can see sometimes, for example, if you have one too many table data items, it'll just keep going through. HTML is like very like kind of like Python, but even more so. It's like, hey, just throw something at me and I probably won't crash. Like that's essentially what HTML is like. So you can see here, there's a new part in here. Okay, not good. All right, cool. Any questions? Awesome, cool. All right, I'll very quickly mention about HTML5. So HTML5 basically allows you to have a bunch of things like headers, nav, footers, main, aside, article, section, canvas. I cannot even tell you all of the different ones. I don't know all of them. I'm not going to try to know all of them, but know that you can basically have different parts. In general, basically all of these things can be replaced with one older tag called div. And you'll still see div used pretty much all the time. You can think of div as just a container. It doesn't really do anything. It just kind of marks saying, hey, this stuff is just like a thing. Like this is like, oh, this div right here is going to represent like comments, you know, and they'll be like div class equals, you know, some thing or whatever. But sometimes if you're, you know, HTML5 is supposed to be the more specific stuff, you'll see some of these things used instead. But in general, div is really like the same thing. Okay. Sound pretty cool? Good. Okay, cool. Again, we're not trying to build websites here. We're going to tear them apart. So I'm not going to go into like super detail. So CSS. So CSS basically is the extra fluff to HTML. It's the thing that makes HTML and websites look pretty. It makes things look like, if you think back in like the early 90s to like what they are today, CSS is the thing that makes it like pretty. And then if you think back in like early 90s with like really kind of crazy, like you think of like the style of like the 90s HTML or like websites and stuff like that with all the different colors and stuff like that, that's because CSS was like, whoa, look at all these things we can do. That's kind of like the start of it. Now people are a little more sophisticated and a little more, you know, relaxed on the design and stuff. But anyway, CSS is useful because it gives us two things, which are class and ID. Class and ID basically are things to identify. In general, CSS, you're writing HTML to say, oh, this is, for example, an article, or this is going to be a summary of the article, right? And you would have something like a class. So this is kind of like how we can reference things very quickly. ID is very similar to class, except ID basically can only occur once. Like you can only have one instance of that ID. So as for web scraping, if you know it's specified by an ID, if you look for the ID, you know you're going to find that one thing. You shouldn't be finding multiple ones. Class, you might have basically like, let's say article summary is the class. Well, there might be multiple article summaries on that one page. Okay. Cool. All right, and you can see here, I just put this in here because it's not important. We're not going to scrape this stuff. But you can see here, this is saying, oh, this H1 is going to be colored blue, and that's CSS. Obviously, there's a lot more to CSS, like we're not going to go into it, but that's really all you need to know. Okay, sound pretty good? All right, so now what I'm going to do is say, okay, let's just check out a website. That's probably the easiest thing to do, and that's going to lead us right into web scraping. So I'm actually going to go into web scraping document here. Okay, no, you know what? I'll show you guys HTML first. All right, so this is the web scrape we're going to scrape because I just picked a website that I know. All right, so you can see, ooh, ads, ooh, look, things are loading. Oh, wow. Okay, so you can see all this craziness, right, going on. But in reality, all it is basically just an HTML document. So if you have Chrome or pretty much any current browser, you can basically right-click on a part of the website and either do like inspect, or I think there's something like developer tools or something along these lines. You can probably look it up for each browser that you use, but at least for Chrome, I can do inspect. And this basically will pull up the HTML that's actually pulling through here. And if I look at this carefully, it's nice because it keeps it all nice and neat. You can actually see, hey, there's that doc type HTML. There's the HTML with some extra attributes right here. You can also see this head right here. And you can see if I open up head, there's a whole bunch of extra information. And these are things that are not being seen. And what's kind of cool with Chrome, at least the way I had it set up, if I highlight over it, you'll see that as I go over it, will see like it highlighted on this side. But because these are all basically metadata stuff, this is scripts and stuff like this, you can see so many scripts. Most of the stuff is for ads. It doesn't render on the side. And you can see some metadata right here saying content text HTML, saying how it's supposed to be written, all these different things. Okay, so in general, we're going to skip over head. And now we can go into the body. So the body is like basically the stuff you see. So if I go ahead and expand body here, you can actually see there's a few things. So there's another script right here. You can see, oh, right here is my ad. So you can actually highlight this over here. You can see it's a div with a certain class, band, header, hidden phone. So maybe something to do with header phone. You can see there's a div again. So a div within a div within a div again. You can kind of break this down and say, oh, here's the link. And you can see here, remember this original guy right here, this is pointing to Android Police, right? And you can see there's also H1 class equals logo, Android Police. So I think if I had this there might be an Android Police here. But what's kind of cool also, if you ever like just exploring, you can take this, hey, I don't like this, delete it. And then you can just remove stuff from the website because it's just an HTML document. So you didn't actually like hack the website or anything like that. You're just doing it on your end. So it kind of makes things a little bit neater. But you can see a little really quickly, like, okay, like for example, here's an article. So let's say it's like, okay, well, I want to pull, let's say I want to scrape this website. I want to pull this information here, right? Well, I can go ahead and like right click this, inspect, and this will actually pull up on the side here. And I'll expand this out so you can see it a little bit better. If it doesn't mess anything up. And you can see here all this stuff, and you can see the structure of this. For example, I go from the body, go down this div here. It's primary column, going down to, then there's a header, div, and this is the div part right here I care about. And then, right here's a link. And you can see here, there's a link to here, href, and then in this link, there's actually an image. And I say, hey, there's that image, and there's that source. And then I can pull that specific source. In this case, you can see it is just a web link, so I can actually take this guy, open up a new tab, and there's the image. So whenever you do something like open image in new tab, that's what you're doing right here. So you can do that with HTML. Okay, so that's kind of like the idea of what we're seeing. Okay, makes sense. So I know it looks very intimidating, I'm sure, like all these different words, all these different things all at once. But try to like cross your eyes a little bit to make it a little bit blurry to like make it less intimidating. It's like, oh, this is all junk. We don't care about this stuff. All we care about is like the meat. Okay, and so that's what we're gonna do with web scraping. All right, sound pretty good?